Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are and whenever you're listening or seeing this talk today. Welcome to the Seeds of Knowledge series. Today I am joined by my co host, Marcia Trajano. And I just wanted to say that if this is the first time you're tuning into one of our discussions about Spiritism, I wanted to let you know that the Solitude Center for Spiritual Living provides these types of talks every first and third Sunday of the month. So today we're going to be talking about a very interesting topic called divine justice. Marcia, hello, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. And I'll see you in a few minutes, okay, Yuri?
I will see
Thank
you.
you. All right. So, hi, everyone. As Yuri very kindly introduced me, I'm Marcia Trajano. I'm a co host of this series. And today we're going to talk about divine justice according to Spiritism. So, will be a bit of exploration of the topic and how does it differ with other type of justice, if there are other type of justice. One of the things that to me is important is to see how divine justice is understood through Spiritism. And we're going to highlight here, especially the works by Allan Kardec. Why? Because I think it's important to deepen our understanding of the moral and spiritual laws that govern our lives. And it's also important, perhaps, for all of us to consider gaining insights into how that type of justice, the divine justice, is not about punishment, but actually a tool for growth and spiritual evolution. And finally, if we can end today with an alignment with what are those principles so that we can have a more compassionate, a more meaningful life. Understanding divine justice is essential for all of us, in my opinion, and love to be here, Yuri. And all of you to talk about this. So let's go ahead and get started. I have here this quote from Heaven and Hell, and it is really interesting. It's chapter 7, paragraph 3, where, as you can read, and I'm going to read out loud here, there is not a single imperfection of the soul that does not carry with it its deplorable, inevitable consequences, and not a single good quality that is not the source of joy. The sum of the penalties is thus proportioned to the sum of imperfection, just as the sum of joy is proportional to the sum of qualities. The soul that has, and I love this, by the way, 10 imperfections, for example, suffers more than one that has three or four. When of those 10 imperfections, only a quarter of half remains, it will suffer less. And when none of them remain, it will no longer suffer from anything and will be perfectly happy. Similarly, on earth, someone with many illnesses suffers more than one who has only one or none. For the same reason, the soul that possesses 10 qualities enjoys more than one with fear. I love how, in a very simple one paragraph in Heaven and Hell, we start to talk about why do I suffer more than you or vice versa, right? But let's go ahead and start discussing a little bit because as you saw, I referenced heaven and hell, but there's more than we can reference when we start to study about divine justice. So, and I really appreciate the opportunity to whenever we come together to review what does spiritism and its perspective bring to the same topic. And for that there are several important key resources and references that to me are integral to understanding and explaining, say, the entire body of work Spiritism offers. But as we know, and some of you may not know, but as most of us know, Spiritist writings of Allan Kardec, who is the codifier of Spiritism, brought to us many books, but the five first books are basic. And I don't put, you see here in the slide, I only have four because there's a reason behind it. But there are five of the first books that are basic to understand Spiritism. And when we start to learn more about the concept of divine justice from that perspective, those four resources and references are central to provide us with this comprehensive understanding of the concept. So those resources are foundational from Allan Kardec's work, but there are others really interesting writings from other spiritist authors and or mediums. So just a second here. If you don't know, the Spirit's book is the foundational work of Spiritism, and all of those are written by Allan Kardec. But in Spiritist book specifically, it contains a series of questions and answers with spirits that cover a wide range of topics, including reincarnation and divine justice. Those two concepts are really intertwined. And for me, this is really the primary, most important reference for understanding divine justice. And if you're interested in looking for more information, please check out there are four parts, but the book one, the first causes, Allan Kardec talks about God, creation, the universe, and in the first questions, and there was a small little questions and rather small little answers. Kardec discusses the nature of God, God's attributes, the idea of divine justice that is inseparable from that goodness and that wisdom. Book two, and in that part of the book, he talks about the world of spirits, questions 154 to 158. Again, four questions. Kardec explores the spiritual realm. Um, what is that view of justice at that dimension? And as such, it talks about consequences, the purpose of divine justice in the evolution of our souls. And finally, when we get to the third part of the book, the third book, as it's known, and it focuses on moral laws, there are about five questions, 613 to 618, and they examine the connection specifically between divine justice and moral laws, including how suffering and joy result from those moral causes. Love them. I highly recommend you check these out. We're not going to have time to go through all of them, but if you get to study any of those books or any of those spiritual materials, I would say focus on that or remember this presentation today. But would like to keep going with that additional explanation because the gospel according to Spiritism is a beautiful work, and it there we are able to expand the teachings of Jesus Christ from that spiritual perspective. And it has a particular focus on, for example, understanding those, we call it moral laws, right? Those laws that are part of the divine justice. Some of the main chapters that would be cool or interesting or good if you want to expand your thoughts on divine justice are chapter 2, and love it. It's called My Kingdom is Not of This World, and there we start to see the difference between material and spiritual laws, and divine justice is explained as it is applied to the eternal soul. You and I are immortal spirits, and we all have this eternal soul. Chapter 5, Blessed are the Afflicted, and this is the hardest one, and to me, probably the most important chapter in all, well, one one of the most important, right, of the gospel according to Spiritism, because in it, Kardec explains the nature of suffering and uh, and we can see from those writings that a form, suffering and pain, and we could even apply from that thought process of punishment, their form of divine justice. And we are given this beautiful idea that as necessary part of spiritual progress and evolution, it is also a point of connection to our own moral imperfections, right? So it's really interesting, hence the title from the Beatitudes by that we see in the Sermon of the Mount. Blessed are the afflicted. Finally, chapter 6, the law of charity. In that specifically, we see divine justice is rooted in love and charity. And those are really, it's really important for all of us to understand. They're really the fundamental principles that guide human interactions and our spiritual evolution, spiritual growth. Finally, we would like to emphasize here a little bit about heaven and hell, as we started just now reading from one of their paragraphs. And in heaven and hell, Kardec provides this thorough explanation of the process of reincarnation, the laws of cause and effect, and that law of cause and effect is also known by many, especially in Eastern religions and philosophy, as karma. And it relates the moral consequences of my and your actions, right? Our actions. It examines how we, as I said before, immortal spirits evolve across different corporeal existence in this eternal life that we have. And the more important relevant sections to me, those are my opinion, in this book are the first part, where it talks and introduces the idea of the justice of God. And Kardec, in that book, he really explores the role of justice, divine justice, and reincarnation in that context of the justice of God. In the second part of the book, where it he brings us the examples of the future life, right? So real life scenarios of spirits that come back and tell their experiences between one existence and the other. And it really highlights how reincarnation is key to understanding the concept of divine justice. We could talk a little bit about the Book of Mediums, which deals about the nature of mediumship, how spirits communicate, how it's the thrust of the book, but it also touches upon divine justice, right? Because it highlights how that phenomenon, the mediumistic phenomena, usually reveals the workings of divine justice in the lives of many of the spirits that communicate. Chapter 9 of that book brings us the law of reincarnation, really important for us to understand. And there is also the section there on the spirit intervention in the moral progress of humanity. So we access some insights into divine justice, and really it will help us understand this balance between what we do, our freedom, against the idea of our need to improve. But this is not all. By any means, it's not all. In addition to those foundational works by Allan Kardec, there are many different books. And those main books, in my opinion, there are Spiritists that discuss divine justice. I like to highlight in the André Luiz and Chico Xavier, or Francisco Cândido Xavier, if you were speaking in Portuguese, right? How they really bring in that collaboration concepts of divine justice. Nosso lar, which is in translated to English, would say our home, really brings about divine justice and the consequences, where we access this detailed depiction of the spiritual realm, the consequences of our actions, specifically of Andrea Louise, and by almost like a novel, right? It reads this storytelling in all those books, but in that story, it really illustrates how divine justice operates upon physical death in your afterlife. It shows how we as spirits must face the consequences of our choices, our actions, and how, very important here, the law of cause and effect works not only in this material dimension, but in the spiritual realm. The Messengers is another book by Andre Luis, and it provides insight in this is a very different aspect to the idea of divine justice, but about the spiritual missions, right? And when we talk about the mission, you were talking now about a highly evolved spirit that perhaps are coming to not only the spiritual realm, but on earth to do something to help us. So there it talks about the divine justice in light of our moral responsibility, right? So, from that aspect, we start to understand the idea of spiritual progress here and there, right? Liberation, it's all about the idea of how divine justice is key in the process of freeing, of liberating all of our spirit from all this baggage that we bring with us. So there in that book, divine justice is key to help spirits who have, and this is all of us, I'm afraid, who have transgressed, who has have done something wrong, right? And in the book, we are told how we can be guided towards our eventual liberation from suffering from our mistakes, and how reincarnation and more improvement are the key instruments for that. Heaven and Hell is another beautiful book that talks about divine justice from the point of view that it governs spiritual life, right, through the law of divine justice. And those are inseparable from the process of learning, suffering, and redemption. And finally, I know I'm talking too much here already, but I'd like to bring those a little bit of context on those references. Workers of Life Eternal sheds light on how divine justice functions through the actions of spiritual helpers, and how they work with different spirits and guide them through the consequences of their past lives. And they provide this direct look at how the law of cause and effect, and how karma plays out in the spiritual dimension. So, the concept of divine justice, as you can see in Spiritism, is deeply, deeply intertwined with the laws of nature, the ideas of reincarnation, and moral growth. And those works, both Allan Kardec's foundational books, they provide the core teachings on the subject, but the other Spiritist authors, including Chico Xavier, they offer, you know, practical insights. They offer case studies that ground us into that idea. We don't need to be a lawyer to understand divine justice. But let's go ahead and keep going here because I think it's important for us to really understand the definition of divine justice. And as you can see here, there are several definitions, but I think as we start by defining it, we also come front and center with the notion that in Spiritism, in that context, divine justice is not about punishment. It is simply a tool for our growth and evolvement. And to do that, then we say, well, let's start with some additional definitions. And the main one to me is understanding the attributes of God. As we can see, God is seen in Spiritism as infinite, omnipotent, and just. And this is really found at the core of all Spiritist books, but especially in the Spirit's book, where it begins with that. And divine justice is inseparable then from God's attributes, from God's goodness, because those attributes of God really are related to love, to mercy, to the natural laws of the universe. So it is justice based on the idea do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? But if we stop to reflect, really, who or what is God? And I just pause for just a bit to reflect upon the idea of God according to whom, right? And if we think about it, we can quickly Google how many religions are there. And it's hard to determine the exact number of religions globally speaking, and it is challenge, especially because they bring us such a vast diversity and different denominations and even belief systems. But if we were to estimate, we would see about more than actually 4,000 distinct religions or faith groups or denominations globally. And it's staggering, but we can really think about grouping them together. And according to data from 2022, if we think about global population by religions, by major religions, we talk about Christianity, a little over 30%, Islam, about a little bit over 25%, Hinduism, 15%, and I'm being estimate here, Buddhism, about 7%, and the remainder religions, and we're talking about Sikhism, Judaism, indigenous beliefs, collectively, they account for the remaining percentage. So, religions differ, right? There are many, it's a very abundant um, form of expression of our faith. But while they differ in the way they do that, most of them will agree that God is our creator. So many myths about our creation, birth of mankind, etc., etc. And it's really interesting because when we pivot back to Spiritism, Spiritism says that God is the supreme intelligence, the first cause of all things, the creator. But in addition to that, Spiritism tells that God is infinite in his perfections. God is eternal, and God is immaterial, unique, omnipotent, sovereignly just, and good. Wow. What is justice, anyways? The definition of justice is one that tells us that it is the quality of being just, of being impartial, of being fair. So it is a principle of moral rightness based on ethics, laws, fairness. It involves the fair treatment of individuals, the protection of rights. And I hope, like me, you're already thinking of the whole array of what that justice, the definition of justice is, right? Because it is also um, the system in place to maintain social order. It really often includes the application of those laws to ensure that all of us, independent of where you're born, your gender, your sexual preference, your cultural context, all of us, despite of who we are, that the laws that apply to all of us are there, and those are threefold, right? The laws will apply punishment or reward or protection. And I think then what comes to our minds when we think about human justice? I don't know about you, but I usually think of punishment. Yeah, right? Cells, sins, transgressions, corrections, all of those ideas come to my mind. But I would say there's more than that. It's really important for us to be fair, right? So, some key components about justice is fairness, right? So, in applying fairness, we ensure that all individuals are treated equally and without bias, which leads to a notion of impartiality, the application of laws or judgments without favoritism. Accountability, meaning that all of us, individuals or groups of people, are accountable for our actions. And regarding, I mentioned before, punishment and reward, it is all about delivering appropriate consequence. And then, keyword here is appropriate consequence or benefits based on our actions or behaviors. And finally, safeguarding through the my rights, right? The rights of individuals, and ensure that no one is deprived of of what they should be entitled to. But there are many different justices, and as such, we can see it from multiple complex, including um, legal justice, right? So the justice expressed through courts and laws, social justice, which is the justice applied so that there is certainty of fair distribution of wealth, opportunity, privileges, and divine justice, which is really all about this concept of a higher power administering, managing more order. So, if we make a quick comparison here between human justice, that legal system, right, and legal system promoting societal fairness, with now divine justice, which is that system that transcends all of our earthly material notions of right and wrong, we start to notice some key in and interesting aspects of that differentiate but highlights what divine justice is. So if we go back to that heaven and hell chapter 7, which is code of penal laws of future life, we can see that it brings to us the concept of the consequences of human actions, particularly in terms of moral and spiritual development in the afterlife. In that book, Kardec explains that, right, that every imperfection or wrongdoing brings inevitable consequences. In my mind's eye, very jokingly here, I see divine justice as this perfect mathematical macro that you put in. This is the transgression or whatever that you do, and it goes into this mathematical um, calculation and accounts for my lack of knowledge, my lack of experience in make certain decisions, or if I am knowledgeable, in other words, I knew better and I did it anyways, my intention versus accidental type of activity, and it spews out what it should be, right? So it's a very, very perfect, accurate and precise system to really understand what should the consequence really be. So think about it in the future life. The suffering or joy that I experience should be directly proportioned to the good, or for lack of a better word, the bad action. I like to say the bad as the pain that I inflict on myself and the environment or others, right? And all about what we do while we are living this corporeal existence. The more imperfection, as I read before, and those imperfections can be seen as flaws or sins, or and I don't know if I like the word sin a lot, but those flaws, those failures, those when we when we fall and don't do as we intended. Let's think about, the more we do those, the more I accumulate consequences, and I will potentially have to suffer directly proportion to the amount of transgressions or pain that I have afflicted. So, as the text says, the soul with fear imperfection will be experience much less pain. So, in so many words, the law of cause and effect is now key to understand what divine justice is, because it's all about the consequence of one's action, and they are inevitable, and no one, no matter who your mother and father or your social standing, your level of education, no one is exempt from facing the results of their deeds. Just as a person, as in the text said, with that has a more frail body and is suffering from more illnesses, is going through so much more pain than a healthier body or a soul with less imperfections, right? So it's important for us to think about it, because as we improve, as we grow, and we correct those inherent imperfections that we have, we will suffer less and less. And eventually, we're going to get to a state of infinite happiness, infinite peace, when all of our issues are resolved. Kardec confirms this idea of divine justice as a fair and balanced system, because it brings the idea to us in many of the writings that the soul experiences the outcomes of its actions. So it's mine. I am responsible for my actions. I'm accountable for my actions. And it is up to me how fast I address those imperfections or not, right? So I just want to say that in the some of the writings we in that chapter of a chapter, the paragraph from heaven and hell, right? We think about it, our very human, very material mind can think exclusively in the sense of I have 10 imperfection, therefore I will suffer equals 10, which is not the perfect calculation that divine justice has. But we may think that it is all about a system to pay back, right? However, and I'm joking here, but it's important for us to perhaps think about it. Jesus spoke to us of our merciful Father who wants us to correct ourselves, who wants us to change our attitude, not pay back, not be punished. So, knowing that God is our Father, our Creator, we should really scratch the idea that God is a money lender, right? But think about it. If he's not a money lender, very material definition here, but what would be then the best interpretation of I have to pay back to God? Well, paying for a father means correcting. In this ledger of debts and credits, God always offers us credit to help us repay and make amends for our mistakes, in the same analogy. If today we think about the human system, justice system, and it already has punishments for crimes with, for example, community service, right? um, Often, especially first offenders, they're like, "Oh, you've done that. Okay, Marcia, you really messed up here. I'm not going to put you in jail. I'm going to ask you to spend 40 hours doing community service." If, as flawed as human justice system is, can you imagine divine justice where God offers us his unconditional love? It's unimaginable how much better it is. So, if you think about it, divine justice, as it is based on this divine, this sacred, this unconditional love, coupled with the idea of the law of successful, I can speak, successful lives, right? Corporeal life after corporeal life. It really, that justice offers us opportunities to improve ourselves without violating the laws of action and reaction, but through work or new actions, right? And not necessarily through suffering, which would be always referencing correction and reaction. So think about it: action, reaction. I can create new actions that undermine or dilute or diminish the reaction from my original action, or I can stay with my action and my simple reaction or correction of that. Oh, too many words. But it is important for us to think that from that materialistic perspective, it is really difficult to understand divine justice holistically speaking, especially if we are now suffering, we are going through pain, or we're facing, it's very, front and center in our faces, we are dealing with inequalities, like so many, when they see um, groups of people suffering diseases, or other groups of people being so happy and have really work to do because they're just in this hedonistic life of pleasure, right? And we might even ask, why would a father use different measures for his children, creating the idea of creating some for suffering and others for this so-called good life? But it's it's not that simple, right? If you don't mind, I'd like to use the mirror analogy here, because we could imagine divine justice as a mirror, And the mirror, we're facing the mirror, right? And it reflects our actions. When we act with kindness and love and respect, what we get? The reflections clear and bright. But when we act, on the other hand, with, oh, selfishness, harming, negativity, the reflection in that mirror will most likely show distortion or the consequences of those actions. When we think the spiritual connection here, this metaphor of the mirror may reflect the law of cause and effect, because every action that you take, that you think, that you intend to take, sends out an energy like a reflection in the mirror, right? And that same energy that you send out of you comes back to you. So, divine justice in this context is about the soul seeing its own actions so that it can learn from them. And once I, as the spirit, see myself, see the effect of my reaction, I can start to perhaps address them. I can start perhaps restoring them so that I will reestablish balance, reestablish harmony, and of course, progress as a learning. I also like another analogy, which is one that you probably have heard, which is the gardener analogy. So, when we think of a gardener planting seeds in a garden, we know that if this gardener plants good seeds, positive actions here, they will reap beautiful flowers or fruits, which is the good outcomes from what he or she is sowing, right? Um, um, if they plant bad seeds, aka negative actions, they will reap weeds of thorns, aka undesirable consequences. So the spiritist connection here, again, it reflects the law of karma, the law of action reaction, or what so many people call sowing and reaping. Every action we take is like planting that seed, and divine justice ensures that we eventually, it doesn't have to be today, depending on what I'm doing with as I'm gardening, right? But we eventually will harvest the consequences of those seeds. They may be good or bad, we don't know, but over time, the idea here is that we learn and we grow and we start to be more selective and be more prepared, and we plant better seeds in better conditions, and we'll get to a much better set of results. um, so it's quite interesting to think about these analogies, because they may show how simple yet powerful justice, divine justice, can be understood in Spiritism. It is, just to rephrase it, right, restate it, is a system not of punishment, but it is a system that promotes my and your moral evolution, spiritual growth. And it is really this opportunity for each one of us to correct our imperfections, our flaws, our mistakes, and start to be catapulted toward a state of happiness and enlightenment. But I talked a lot about the law of karma, action and reaction. Let's spend a few more minutes with those thoughts, right? And I have to jokingly say, whenever I'm talking to you, I'm thinking, and in my mind, I am singing as well. Um, Famous Tina Turner song when she said, "What's karma got to do with it? Got to do with it?" Just joking. But what is cause and effect so known by karma? Well, the word karma comes from Sanskrit kar, to do, and ma, effect or consequence. Meaning, as we could think, is simply put, the consequence of everything. And everything here includes what we think, what we desire, what we do. If we put it all together, we can then understand that this law of justice, according to Spiritism, is based on that law of action and reaction, or in so many people call it law of karma or law of causality. And I have to be reminded of what Jesus taught us, right? He taught us the proverbial, to each according to their deeds. In Matthew chapter 16, in verse 27, he says, "For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what they have done." Jesus meant, with those words given to us by Matthew, that each one is judged by words, thoughts, and feelings, or each one is judged by all the factors, all that ecosystem of thoughts and ideas, or any of the cultural context where I am, right? All of it, so that we will determine what our actions are. And I think we should remember that we are today the result of the actions we took in the past. I have married more than once, and it's very interesting in the discussions, perhaps between me and my husband, when we talk about, do you regret? And we say no, because I am today because of what I was so many years prior, right? We are today the result of what we were. When we complain about what happens to us or how much we suffer, let us just think about it. Let us remember that we are the architects of ourselves. Let us also remember that no one imposes any punishment on us. No one judges whether we deserve this or that. By the law of justice, our human spirit, our soul, is guided in its work toward these achievement, this conquest, this challenge of getting to be a perfect soul when we are still imperfect. And it's all part of the law of evolution. If I keep on talking about yet another biblical reference, Revelation 22, verse 12, we are faced with the idea, look, the words, right? Look, I'm coming soon. My reward is with me, and I will give to each person according to what they have done. And in Revelation, we also see the echo of that idea that we saw in Matthew, right? The idea that Jesus will return and Jesus will reward each one of us according to our actions. It really brings the tone, the emphasis on divine justice, as it is based on the assessment of our own deeds, both good and bad, and determining the outcome accordingly. So the idea is quite consistent. We are all accountable for how we live, and as the aftermath or the results of such assessments, we will receive rewards or consequences based on our work. If we break it down, we'll see that it's all about the notion of accountability, responsibility, and this law of cause and effect. The idea that we'll be judged, rewarded, or held accountable based on our actions, choices, and how we live our lives, as I said before. So the outcomes of our life, both in this world, a very material experience, a material existence, and the next, a very spiritual dimension, they are directly linked to how I live, how I act, and how I treat the others. So, hint, hint, let's be kind, let's be loving and generous in all of our actions. Some of the things that I would like to perhaps I have a few more minutes to talk about here is accountability, the notion of accountability for our actions. We see that Jesus emphasized that each action or each person will be judged or rewarded according to their action, according to how they live their life. It's not just about my faith, how much I worship, or even what type of God or religious sect or the formulations that my faith system puts me into. It's all about how I show love, how I demonstrate kindness, compassion, and how I live. And I'm going to use a word that implies judgment, but it's not here, but how I live righteously. Another point here for us to understand is that moral and spiritual consequences, right? We understand here that moral and spiritual growth has to go hand in hand with the notion of real consequences. Again, if I do good, I will be rewarded. If I don't do good, I will have to face my choice, my consequences. And it is super aligned with what we've been talking here from a divine justice definition perspective, because everything has a repercussion, including the speed by which I will or not evolve as a spirit, right? It's all about each micro decision that we make on a daily basis. So the law of cause and effect based on Jesus' teachings is all about the principle that a cause, an action will lead to an outcome, the effect. And I love it because it's really core to Spiritist views, right? That each one of us will reap the fruit of our action, meaning that we have baggage, we have lives, the stories, this inheritance that we have that we bring with us, and they are undeniable. No matter how much we repress those memories, they are who we are. And but we will determine the future by how I live today, right? So everyone is really responsible. And I would love for us to walk out of here today with this notion that we are indeed accountable, and that we should measure the quality of our actions based on what we learn today, right? That is truly aligned with the concept of multiple corporeal lives or multiple incarnations, and the incredible merciful God, our creator, our father, that gives us so many different opportunities to address, to correct, to repair, if you will, our past deeds, or how our incredible potential to hurt ourselves and others. So when we do that, we are catapulted to a greater spiritual and more perfect life. So, in conclusion, right, when Jesus taught us to each according to their deeds, he is really highlighting the importance of our actions and our choices, which includes how we treat others, how we choose to live, what we choose to believe. And I'm talking about believe in terms of our opinions and how they all um, interconnect with our own spiritual journey. And Jesus is really telling us that there is fairness and justice in this system that we call divine law. Despite the fact, if I look to myself, to my side, and I start to see evidence to a feeling that God or life is not fair, you say exactly the opposite. It is so fair that it is quite scary. As I said before, this is my own crazy way of thinking. It is a perfect system that accounts all of it. How how much I know and still continue to fail despite what I have already taught and how much I have experienced. So we could go on for another full hour. I have a little story. So let me see if I have a little story. I have time to tell the story, right? This is fiction, right? But let's talk about it before we we call it a day, right? There was once upon a time a woman named Isabel. She lived in the 19th century, and Isabel was quite wealthy, and she had a life of luxury in that century. She often misused her wealth, her power, and as a result, Isabel was quite selfish, inconsiderate, and treated the poor with, oh, yes, disdain. She was also known for her arrogance, for how cruel she was, even and especially to her servants and to those around her that were less fortunate than Isabel was. She truly believed that her wealth and social status meant that she could do whatever she wanted without any consequence. She had a privileged life to choose and not think about, oh, I don't have to have any filters because I will be protected. So Isabel's life was also focused on material pleasures. If she saw somebody that was suffering, she would look elsewhere. She did not want to be bothered with that. And she would make decisions that would hurt others in order to protect herself or to gain something to herself. She lived without much thought about repercussion for her action. That was what she believed. But as the story goes, this is a story, Isabel passed away. Yes, like all of us, we will all pass away and we will find, like Isabel, um, we will find ourselves in the spiritual realm. And in the case of Isabel, right, she was surrounded by darkness. She had no clue what happened. And a spiritual guide appears and explains to her that Isabel, dear Isabel, your actions during your past life caused so many harms to so many people, and you indeed left a trail of resentment, of hatred, or if nothing else, of victims suffering from her actions. And the spiritual guide start to explain to Isabel the law of cause and effect, right? Everything, Isabel, that you had done would eventually return to you. Well, now it's the time. And the guide told that although she could not change the past, She, like all of us, have the opportunity to repair all the wrongs that we commit now in the future lives. But first, Isabel, we need to go through this process of self reflection, a process that was required for her own inner transformation. So Isabel was quite troubled. She was curious. She never thought about anything would come back to her, that she was immune to any consequences of her actions, especially in the spiritual sense. Incarnation, reincarnation. Isabel is now reincarnated into a new life in a much more difficult situation. Yes. This time, she was born into a poor family. They struggled a lot. Her body was quite frail. She faced many challenges as a child. She had, oh, such a hard time growing up. And quite often she was bullied, she was mistreated, and mostly because of her appearance and socioeconomic status. Isabel grew older, and as she did that, she began to experience the same suffering that she had once inflicted upon others. It was hard, so hard for her to accept, but she, merciful God, she was assigned spiritual mentors, and they would talk to her, they would guide her through intuition, through dreams. And she slowly started to realize the connection between past actions from a previous life to her current life. She, Isabel, started to recognize that she was given the opportunity to learn, to empathize, to be humble, to be kind. And despite her many struggles, she began to learn, really deeply learn, the goodness that comes from serving others, to help those who need, to be a source of support in her community. She, despite facing hardship, she became more and more graceful. She began to ask for forgiveness in her prayers. She asked forgiveness from those she had harmed in past lives, and those are really beautiful types of prayers, but from the people around her in this life. After many years of suffering, learning, and helping others, Isabel reached a point of spiritual awakening. She had transformed her heart, her mind, and now her actions began to reflect love, kindness, selflessness. As a result, the harshness she had once experienced started to lessen. In this life, she started to actually experience moments of peace. She felt a deep sense of spiritual fulfillment. And as it all happens, Isabel passed away again, and she found herself now in a much brighter spiritual realm. Her spiritual guide from the previous life came to her once more. This time, Isabel understood. She was able to opt and make progress through her journey. And it was not complete, as we know. It was just one other step, but she learned so many lessons through that divine justice and the law of cause and effect that guide her through multiple lives. Isabel souls like ours are evolving, and the lessons we all learn will continue to serve her and us in our next incarnation. Her soul, in this case, was no longer burdened with the weight of guilt and regret. She was able to repair many wrongs she had done in previous lives, and she had contributed positively to the spiritual progress of those around her. She was not ready to move forward. She was now ready, sorry, to move forward on her journey of spiritual evolution. Wow, this is a story that reminds us that God does not condemn. God saves us. His divine mercy is always within our reach. And our Father, our Creator, wants us to deserve it freely and willingly, for it is the mechanism that facilitates our own evolution. As we know, Jesus, who's our consoler, helps us in this evolutionary path, this journey. I call it this ascension to our Father, this reconnecting with our Father. And despite understanding that, yes, I know we still have a lot to learn, and we have a lot of the predominance to harm, to afflict, to cause pain in others and ourselves, the predominance of our past errors in our actions will diminish, because Jesus, as all of our spiritual guides, are here to guide us. And our Father, He is merciful, and He extends His mercy to us through reincarnation and, yes, forgetfulness of our past lives. So it is interesting to consider here this issue of responsibility, because divine justice is a system that governs each one of us, and actually each community of people, according to our spiritual evolution. And the greater evolution we attain, we are actually more accountable, and we also have a clear and broader scope for exercising our free will. I just want to say thank you so very much for being here with me. And every time that we can perhaps reflect upon this brief discussion on um, karma, action, reaction, reincarnation, and divine justice, we start to understand all of it, how they intertwined. And I just want to say thank you so much for being here. And let us all be good, be gentle, be fair, be kind. I think you're coming back, and I just want to say I appreciate you being here with me.
Thank you so much, Marcia. Thank you for the enlightening talk. Very interesting, yet very applicable to our daily lives. So, thank you so much for that. Would you be so kind as to do the final prayer for us today?
Of course, thank you. Thank you for that, Yuri. And if you don't mind, I'd like to just close my eyes, invite all of us, if you are in a position to do so, to also close your eyes and just bask in the sun, the warmth, and the light that comes from our Creator, our Father. It is He who gives us all that we need. It is at our fingertips. All of our lives, the context, the culture, all of our choices, all the opportunities to redirect to an easier, better outcomes. May we all receive the spiritual inspiration, insights, the strength, the courage, the patience with ourselves, so that we can evolve and become better, more aligned with our sacred and divine Father. So be it.
And so it is. Thank you once again. Thank you, everybody who watched or listened to this, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye bye.